Hello, my name is Emily Skillings, and I'm recording this video in Brooklyn, New York, where I live. I'm the editor of Parallel Movement of the Hands, 5 Unfinished Longer Works by John Ashbery, which is coming out this month with Carcanet, which I'm very excited about. I was Ashbery's assistant from 2010 until his death in 2017. I wanted to say a big thank you to Carcanet for so wonderfully shepherding Ashbery's publications in the UK throughout the years. He was so grateful for his relationship with this press, and it's wonderful to be able to continue that relationship with this publication, the first book of his poetry to be published after his passing. The book also has a wonderful preface, foreword by Ben Lerner, the poet and novelist whom John Ashbery admired very much, and I'm also very grateful for it. I began editing this book in the spring of 2018 with a partner, Farnoosh Fati, who was just so instrumental in the early work of this collection. Some of these poems I knew about while I was working for Ashbery. Some I came across while packing up his papers in New York City in his apartment where I worked. One I actually found in the basement of his Hudson home, and some were found and brought to me by David Kermani, Ashbery's husband, who was also so supportive and instrumental in every step of this project. Knowing Ashbery's handwriting, I helped him prepare manuscripts sometimes. And so knowing his handwriting and his way of correcting a manuscript and editing it made some aspects of editing this work simpler, but there were some moments where I had to follow my intuition as an editor and make choices about what I think Ashbery would have wanted. For example, there's a moment in the final poem of the book, The Kane Richmond Project, where Ashbery typed a word that could have either been impatient or omnipotent, which are two very different words. And even Ashbery himself, reviewing the manuscript, seemed to have been confused about which word he meant. He wrote impatient, ? Omnipotent ? And so I had to make a decision. I had to come to a decision about which of those words I was going to pick. And these are challenging moments, as often I chose impatient. These were challenging moments, as often to make a definite decision limits possibilities within a work. This, we know, is why Emily Dickinson noted variants for words in her poems, which kept them alive with possibility. And for this reason, I compiled an appendix for each poem so that I could share my more significant editorial decisions and some of the textual variants with readers of the work. And here I'm indebted to the guidance of my mentor for the project, the poet, editor, and professor Roseanne Wasserman, who also edited Ashbery's collected French translations, poetry and prose, with her husband, Eugene Ritchie. And her advice was valuable at these cruxes in the text. Cruxes is actually a word that Wasserman taught me, and one that I can't seem to stop using. It's a very valuable word to me now. I highly recommend it. So each of the 5 poems in this book are in some way unfinished, which means different things in this book. Sometimes it means they weren't really prepared for publication, but had kind of reached their end. Some it means they feel kind of abandoned midway. So it was great to see that kind of variation in finishedness. And I think this idea of the unfinished is really interesting with regard to Ashbery because of the way that he, as a poet, so valued the sensibility of the unfinished or the open-ended. Right, not closing a text. Lynn Haginian has this great essay called The Rejection of Closure that I thought about a lot while thinking about this idea of the unfinished. I also think it makes them stand out as these poems that perhaps needed their own space, that didn't fit into the books Ashbery was publishing at the time he wrote them. I'm also a poet in addition to being an editor, and it made me think about the reasons I've left things unfinished or nearly finished or almost finished for the years, which was interesting to think about. So the 5 poems in this book are also in their own way each ekphrastic or somewhat ekphrastic, meaning they respond to or touch upon different artistic forms. The first poem is called The History of Photography. It's very beautiful. That's the one I found in the basement, and mentions many pioneers and pioneering techniques in early photography. But it, of course, being a long poem and being an Ashbery poem, digresses from the subject, using photography as a kind of lyric tether throughout the poem that he returns to and strays from. The last poem in the book is a kind of love letter to cinema, specifically the cliffhanger form, and follows the antics of this B-movie actor, Kane Richmond. Oh, there are fireworks outside. And it had so many amazing film references that I couldn't even look them all up. Like every time I read it, I find a new film reference that I missed. I'm literally still discovering new ones now. The center poem, and I'm being kind of reductive here, is a kind of humorous and philosophical narrative riff on one of the parables of Jesus, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins. It's a prose piece. But the work that I'd like to read from tonight is a long, instead of being a long work, it's a long united sequence of shorter poems based on the work on a musical work by the Austrian composer Carl Czerny called Opus 740, The Art of Finger Dexterity. Now, Czerny was a pupil of Beethoven, and he was Liszt's teacher, and he composed almost 1,000 works of music, so he had a really impressive body of work. Ashbery loved this piece of music, The Art of Finger Dexterity, and he said about it in an interview, quote, "Lately, I've been listening with a lot of interest to The Art of Finger Dexterity by Carl Czerny, which was written to torture piano students. It's mostly silly little tunes ornamented in a very complicated way to stretch the fingers to the limits of endurance. It's kind of beautiful because of having been written from that angle to educate the fingers." And Ashbery did listen to these pieces while he was writing, or at least some of the time. David Kermani told me, which is exciting to think about. So Ashbery intended to compose a poem titled after each of the 50 variations in Opus 740, but only completed 28. They have these fabulous titles about what each variation is supposed to teach the piano student to do with their hands. Or with tempo. One thing I noticed while I was first transcribing these poems was that 2 of the variations were doubled in Ashbery's sequence, meaning that poems 10 and 21 both had 2 poems with the same number and title. This reminded me of hands playing alongside each other on the keys of the piano, this doubling. And tonight I'm going to read the twin poems they're both titled Parallel Movement of the Hands, which is also the title of the book. Their number is 21, and I'm going to try to play the corresponding piece of music by Carl Czerny, if it works, in the background as I read. So before I read, and I will say, and I said this in my introduction, that my favorite part of this process, the part I enjoyed absolutely the most, was transcribing the poems, actually typing them from the typescripts, from the originals, as it felt like Ashbery's humor, his voice, was inside my head again, and I've missed him and his voice and his presence in my life so much. Part of my job with him is taking dictation for correspondence when he would write people letters, and transcribing these poems kind of felt like that. So that was such a gift, to be able to have his voice in my head again. And this has been such a humbling and inspiring process. So without further ado, I'm going to read the 2 poems in the collection that are both titled Parallel Movement of the Hands. Parallel Movement of the Hands. Don't put me on the desk. I was afraid I was going to die very soon on a paper spree. Any nice person will die very shortly. It doesn't really fit. A missing dog or donkey registered does the American State Police talk show no favors. Just as in the past you coaxed belligerent sweetness from the hedge and then it was gone. Color? Why no color? What did you expect from the microtonal overlap of minutes? And then when it did stand up, it was like nothing you ever imagined. There was an unshapely tuft where the chimes rang, and forever after it was solid wall. Nothing so became it as its tiresome leave-taking. We were all pretty much dispatched to our different sectors when the truth happened and bombed yet again. What registers no vibration can't expect to be named a consequence or correspondent if the peaceful enemy is really coming back to engage the shares that were laid down ages ago and are now indistinguishable from gaps in the truth. See, here, it seems to say, this is a consequence, though inconsequential, and all of what was first only by dreaming itself into position. It's funny about dreams. They happen pretty much everywhere. That's why you can't ever be sure you're in one, or out of it. Why the rules of assembly never apply to you in the present, only later, when the color of time being is finished anyway. Parallel movement of the hands. Saw him running, a sunken wraith. Rather than figuring it all out in 1 hour, pull the mud out from under him, whether that explains the Treaty of Hubertusburg or this or that spring wardrobe. It's my placebo, with all the trimmings, the way we and others like it, just so it belongs to us and them. Granted, a day of catching up, we could work within the barriers foreign trade imposes on our purpose-built big casino gazebo. Your and our place, gliding across the keys mindlessly in a penance a dream imposes. Otherwise, where are they going to get backing for the shift in ways of thinking that lead invariably to your correct address, pulling your house and delusions with it into the stream? If it's that, then I endorse it. Our citizenry, commonwealth, society, all rowing frantically away from today's mischief as from a wreck in real time, never to congratulate anyone again on the light that emerges to bathe us that we bear no responsibility for or our felicity. The wind blows where it wants. The wind will carry it away. Thank you.